January 25, 2000. A CD arrives at record stores across America. The cover shows a shirtless young man with cornrows, eyes closed, looking like he's mid-ecstasy or mid-prayer. Maybe both. Inside are 13 songs that don't sound like anything on the radio. The drums stumble and swagger like a drunk man walking. The bass lines slither and slide, never quite landing where you expect. The vocals are buried in the mix, whispered and mumbled in a language fans would call demonics. The album is called Voodoo. It took 5 years to make. It used over 200 reels of analog tape. It was recorded at the same studio where Jimi Hendrix made history. And it featured a collective of musicians who would gather every night at Electric Lady Studios in New York, jamming until sunrise, chasing something they called the vibe. Within 2 weeks, Voodoo hits #1 on the Billboard 200, selling 320,000 copies in its first week. By year's end, Time magazine names it the #1 album of 2000. At the 2001 Grammys, it wins Best R&B Album. But the story behind Voodoo isn't a celebration. It's a cautionary tale about artistic perfectionism, about a music video that made its creator a sex symbol he never wanted to be, and about a man who made one perfect album, and then vanished for 14 years. This is the story of how D'Angelo, Questlove, Russell Elevado, and a mysterious producer named Dilla created neo-soul's greatest masterpiece, and how that masterpiece almost destroyed everyone involved. Welcome to the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. This is D'Angelo's. To understand Voodoo, you have to understand what D'Angelo was running from. February 1995. A 21-year-old from Richmond, Virginia, releases his debut album Brown Sugar. It's smooth, it's sexy. It's produced by Bob Power, engineered to perfection, polished for radio play. And it works. Brown Sugar goes platinum. The single Lady becomes a gold-selling hit. The music industry labels it the birth of neo-soul, a term D'Angelo's manager Kedar Massenberg coins to market this new blend of R&B, hip-hop, and jazz. But D'Angelo hates it. Russell Elevado, who mixed 3 songs on Brown Sugar, remembers D'Angelo's frustration. He wasn't completely happy with the music. He said the album should have been mixed in a different way, more raw, more edgy. But 7 songs were already mixed, and we had to match the album. The problem wasn't the success, it was the sound. Brown Sugar was too clean, too digital, too perfect. D'Angelo heard Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, Sly Stone, Prince, Jimi Hendrix in his head. He heard imperfection. He heard humanity. He heard dirt and grit and sweat. Bob Power's production gave him none of that. As Brown Sugar dominated radio in 1995, D'Angelo was already planning his escape. He and Elevado would listen to records together, pulling out albums from D'Angelo's collection. Elevado noticed Stevie Wonder's Music of My Mind and Talking Book. I showed him that Stevie did these records at Electric Lady, Elevado recalls. D'Angelo's eyes lit up. Electric Lady Studios. The studio Jimi Hendrix built in 1970, the place where he died recording Electric Ladyland. The studio where Stevie Wonder created his masterpieces in the early 70s. Where David Bowie made Young Americans. Where Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Hall & Oates captured lightning in a bottle. By 1996, Electric Lady had fallen on hard times. The glory days seemed over. The equipment was dusty. The vibe was forgotten. D'Angelo saw opportunity. D'Angelo said, "We're going to Electric Lady. It has the blessings of the spirits. We have to go there. It's only right," Elevado remembers. What D'Angelo didn't know was that he was about to start a 5-year journey. He didn't know he would use 200 reels of 2-inch tape. He didn't know he would create a collective called the Soulquarians, who would revolutionize R&B and hip-hop. He didn't know he would make an album so perfect, so revolutionary that it would break him. He just knew he needed to make something real. Early 1997, Electric Lady Studios, 52 West 8th Street, Greenwich Village, New York City. D'Angelo, Russell Elevado, and drummer Ahmir Questlove Thompson walk into Studio A for the first time. The walls are covered with paintings and collages from the Hendrix era. Vintage equipment sits in corners. A Fender Rhodes piano Stevie Wonder used on Talking Book, microphones Jimi Hendrix sang into, amplifiers that captured the sound of a generation. Questlove remembers, "We spent the whole day admiring the paintings and collages on the wall. We were marveling at them. To go into that building was like going inside of a spaceship. But there was a problem. Electric Lady was scheduled for demolition. New owners planned to knock down walls and modernize the space. The 3 musicians made a pact. We decided that we were going to get up at 9 in the morning and stand in front of the building so they couldn't knock down the wall," Questlove recalls. "We were going to stand in front of the actual wrecking ball. They set alarms for 8 a.m. When Questlove called D'Angelo that morning, the singer answered half asleep. The demolition was called off. Electric Lady survived and became the birthplace of a revolution. The sessions began simply. D'Angelo, Questlove, and bassist Pino Palladino would gather in Studio A around 7 p.m. They would jam, sometimes for hours, sometimes all night. Russell Elevado would record everything on 2-inch tape. It was just straight jamming and recording. Elevado explains, "We went through 200 reels of tape that year alone. 200 reels. At $300 per reel, that's $60,000 in tape costs for 1997 alone. And the sessions were just beginning. But this wasn't mindless jamming. D'Angelo had a vision. He and Questlove would spend hours before sessions studying. They watched bootleg videotapes of James Brown performing. They watched Prince live at the 1985 American Music Awards. They watched Soul Train episodes from the 70s. They listened to Sly and the Family Stone's There's a Riot Going On repeat. There was a lot of studying, Elevado remembers. One thing that Dee discovered during this time was that Prince wouldn't be Prince without the influence of Jimi Hendrix. Then he started realizing that everyone was influenced by Hendrix, from George Clinton to Stevie Wonder. D'Angelo became obsessed with Hendrix's guitar tone, with Stevie's keyboard sounds, with the drum sound on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, with the bass on Sly Stone Records. He wanted music that sounded old, music that sounded muddy, thick, textured, music that sounded like it was recorded in 1971, not 1997. Elevado understood. I wanted to make records like the way my heroes made records. I don't like to use compressors and take away my textures because I was raised on music that was recorded before technology advanced to the place where it could be smooth. I want to hear that thickness of sound. You can't get that from a computer. So they did everything analog. No Pro Tools, no digital editing, just tape machines, vintage microphones, and live performances. Music writer Touré described the environment. What started as the follow-up to D'Angelo's 1995 platinum debut, Brown Sugar, became 5 years of study at Seoul University, complete with classes, pranks, gossip, and equal amounts of discipline and laziness. The sessions developed a routine. D'Angelo would call a session for 2 p.m., but everyone knew that meant 6 or 7 p.m. He would arrive, they would jam, they would watch videos, they would study records. Questlove describes one legendary night. One night they played Prince's Parade until they flowed into a new groove that became Africa. Pino Palladino, the Welsh bassist who had worked with The Who and Paul Young, became D'Angelo's secret weapon. The singer had met Palladino while recording a duet with B.B. King and was blown away by his ability to play James Jamerson bass lines verbatim. D'Angelo composed all the bass lines for Voodoo and taught them to Palladino, who would then learn and improvise around them on his 1961 Fender P-Bass. The result was bass lines that slithered and swayed, never quite landing on the beat, creating what D'Angelo called the grease. As word spread about the sessions at Electric Lady, other artists started showing up. Erykah Badu, whose debut Baduism had made her neo-soul's first lady in 1997, started recording her second album Mama's Gun in Studio B. Common, the conscious rapper from Chicago, began working on Like Water for Chocolate down the hall. Q-Tip from a tribe called Quest dropped by to work on what would eventually become his solo album Kamal the Abstract. Mos Def and Talib Kweli wandered in. Roy Hargrove, the jazz trumpeter, brought his horn. Singer Bilal started hanging around. Keyboardist James Poyser became a regular. The studio became a 24-hour creative commune. Questlove explains, "You just come into a room, you don't even know who has a session, but you call me, who's down there? Common's in there today. So you come down, you order some food, sit down and bulls, watch a movie, and then it's, let's play something. And I say, who wants this track? And it would be, I want it. No, I want it." Songs became communal property. Common would create a track called Ghetto Heaven for his album, but it was originally meant for D'Angelo to duet with Lauryn Hill. When Lauryn wasn't available, Common asked to keep it. In exchange, D'Angelo took Chicken Grease, a funk track Common had commissioned but didn't know what to do with. The collective didn't have a name at first, but they kept saying Soulquarians, a play on Aquarius, the astrological sign shared by the core members. Questlove, D'Angelo, James Poyser, and a mysterious producer from Detroit named J. Dilla. J. Dilla? James DeWitt Yancey, J.D. The names all referred to the same person, a 23-year-old beatmaker from Detroit who was about to change music forever. Questlove describes the moment he first heard Dilla's work with Slum Village. "It was a messiah moment in a way for people like me and D'Angelo and Q-Tip. We had been looking for someone to lead us out of the darkness, to take us across the desert. What made Dilla revolutionary wasn't just his sample choices or his drum sounds, it was his approach to rhythm itself. Most hip-hop producers used quantization, a technical feature that locks drum hits to a perfect grid, ensuring every beat lands exactly on time. The result is tight, mechanical, robotic. Dilla turned quantization off. He would play beats on his Akai MPC 3000 by hand, in real time, deliberately placing drum hits slightly before or after the beat. The result was music that sounded drunk, sloppy, human. Questlove described it as like a drunk toddler drumming. D'Angelo became obsessed. He told Questlove, "We need to play like JD programs." The concept was revolutionary. Have real musicians deliberately play wrong to sound more human. Play behind the beat, rush some hits, drag others. Create intentional imperfection. Questlove explains, "For D'Angelo's Voodoo, we wanted to play as perfectly as we could, but then deliberately inserted the little glitch that makes it sound messed up. The idea was to sound disciplined, but with a total human feel." Music writer Dan Charnas would later call this Dilla time, a new rhythmic approach that blended straight and swung feels, creating a new, pleasurable, disorienting rhythmic friction. Although J Dilla didn't receive official production credits on Voodoo, his influence was everywhere. Questlove confirms, JD helped to bring out the album's dirty sound and encourage the false starts and the non-quantized sound of the record. He's the zenith of hip-hop to us. When Dilla finally received his advance copy of the Voodoo vinyl, he looked at the credits, turned to DJ House Shoes and asked, "Where's my name?" It's one of the tragedies of the album's legacy. By 1998, the sessions at Electric Lady had taken on a life of their own. While Questlove worked on D'Angelo's album in Studio A, he was also producing The Roots' Things Fall Apart in Studio B. Sometimes he would run between rooms, recording drums for one album, then sprinting to lay down tracks for another. After a while, that got tiring, Questlove admits. Suddenly, we started using Studio B at Electric Lady. I would go into the studio to work with one person, and while I was there, I'd meet another person and start working together with them. The studio even had a mascot, a cat they called Jimmy. Keyboardist James Poyser remembers, if there was a song he didn't like, he would jump up and run out of the room. But D'Angelo's perfectionism was becoming legendary and exhausting. Russell Elevado describes D'Angelo's vocal process. Some tracks had up to 40 vocal layers, all him. Every harmony, every breath, stacked and blended with precision. I spent hours carving out space for each voice using EQ, compression, and old-fashioned ears. When D'Angelo recorded vocals, he liked to be alone. D'Angelo's day would start at 6 o'clock in the evening. Elevado explains. He would call a session for 2 o'clock, but we knew that meant either 6 or 7 in the evening. The recording process was painstaking. Most of the album was recorded live with no overdubbing, the entire band playing together in one take, captured to analog tape. Most of Voodoo was done on 2-inch tape, Elevado explains. With Pro Tools, he could spend 9 hours on vocals. On 2-inch tape, the songs would go on for like 4 days with all these intricate bobs and weaves of vocal parts. The technical complexity was staggering. For the song Doo-Wop, That Thing, Elevado used 128 tracks, 2 48-track machines plus 2 24-track 2-inch machines all running at the same time. And D'Angelo was specific about the sound. He wanted music that sounded muddy, like an old record scratching, Elevado recalls. I remember doing rough mixes with everything flat, no EQ or compression or reverb, and thinking how good everything sounded, just like that, raw and gritty sounding. The album's sonic aesthetic was influenced by Sly and the Family Stone's There's a Riot Going On, an album known for its murky, buried mix. D'Angelo wanted vocals you had to strain to hear, drums that felt loose and lazy, bass that rumbled and shook rather than punched cleanly. I don't want it to sound polished, D'Angelo told Elevado. I want it to sound real. Some songs came together quickly. Playa Playa, the album's opening track, was built from jam sessions. 7 minutes of circular vamping groove that established the album's hypnotic aesthetic. Others took months. The Root, one of the album's most complex arrangements, features vocals that seem to attack the guitar riff from every direction after the 5-minute mark, burying it under an unpredictable barrage of harmonies. The guitarist Charlie Hunter brought his own challenge, a custom 8-string guitar that could play bass and guitar simultaneously. I had separate outputs from Hunter's guitar connected to a separate bass and guitar amplifier, Elevado explains. There was enough separation to manage an adequate sound on both amplifiers in spite of slight bleeding into each other. By late 1999, songs were finally coming together. Devil's Pie, featuring DJ Premier's production and a thunderous bass line, became the album's most straightforward hip-hop moment. D'Angelo raps over the track, delivering verses about spiritual warfare and industry corruption that feel influenced by both Prince and Public Enemy. Left and Right, originally intended to feature a Tribe Called Quest's Q-Tip, ended up with Method Man and Redman after creative disagreements. According to manager Dominique Trenier, Tip's verse was whack. The song samples Fat Joe's Success and Raekwon's Interlude, creating a stuttering, head-nodding groove. Africa, inspired by a night of listening to Prince's Parade, features Roy Hargrove's trumpet floating over a hypnotic, trance-like groove that builds slowly over 7 minutes. Spanish Joint is another showcase for Hargrove, whose horn carries the melody over a Latin-inflected pulse and a guitar solo that sounds lifted from a 1950s Billie Holiday recording. Great Dane de Mornin' Booty starts with a false ending, the word morning cut off mid-syllable, before sliding into booty, a playful, funky strut about physical attraction. And then there's Untitled, How Does It Feel? Co-written with Raphael Saadiq, Untitled was D'Angelo's tribute to Prince, specifically Prince's ballads from the controversy period. The song follows a 6/8-time signature and features electric guitar interplay reminiscent of Jimi Hendrix. But the defining characteristic is D'Angelo's vocal performance. He overdubbed himself dozens of times, creating harmonies that sound like a choir, all him, singing in falsetto that seems to float and ache simultaneously. The song builds to a climax that music writer Steve McPherson called the finest musical approximation of sexual climax since Serge Gainsbourg's Je t'aime, moi non plus. Questlove describes the approach. We were trying to find the line between parody and honesty. In an era of the cover song, redoing a Prince song was taboo. This is the second best thing. January 2000. Voodoo is finally finished. 5 years after Brown Sugar. 3 years after sessions began at Electric Lady. 200 reels of analog tape used. 100 reels remaining in the vault. The album is a masterpiece. D'Angelo knows it. Russell Elevado knows it. Questlove knows it. Everyone who worked on it knows it. But Virgin Records is nervous. The album doesn't sound like radio. The songs are too long. The vocals are too buried. The drums are too loose. Where are the singles? Manager Dominique Trenier has a plan to market the album. And it involves making D'Angelo something he's never been before, a sex symbol. D'Angelo's debut album cover showed him in a hockey jersey behind a piano, looking like a regular guy from Richmond, Virginia. But for Voodoo, Trenier has different ideas. After months with a personal trainer, D'Angelo is physically transformed. His body is sculpted, muscular, magazine cover ready. The Voodoo album cover shows him shirtless, eyes closed, radiating sensuality. Months before the album drops, D'Angelo appears on the cover of Essence magazine. The accompanying story is titled The Soul of a Sex Symbol. In the interview, D'Angelo talks about performing oral sex. This is the marketing campaign. This is how they're going to sell art that doesn't sound like anything else on the radio. Sex. Then comes the video for Untitled, How Does It Feel? Director Paul Hunter and manager Dominique Trenier have a vision. D'Angelo alone, shot from the hips up, shirtless, singing directly into the camera for 4.5 minutes. No cuts, no storyline, no dancers, just him and the viewer. The shoot takes place at a soundstage in New York City. D'Angelo stands on a motion-controlled platform wearing very low-slung pajama bottoms and nothing else. A crucifix hangs around his neck. The camera circles him slowly as he sings, his body glistening under the lights. Hunter remembers the conversation before filming. We talked about the Holy Ghost and the church before that take. The veil is the nudity and the sexuality. But what they're really getting is the spirit. Initially to him, nearly being naked seemed completely bonkers, Trenier later admitted to Spin. He didn't quite get what I was saying. He kept going, "What do you mean naked?" But D'Angelo did it. And when the video premiered on MTV and BT in early 2000, it exploded. Viewer response was divided along sexual lines. Women swooned, many men scowled. Vibe's then editor-in-chief Danielle Smith declared, "It's about time that girls had something luscious to look at while they're listening to a song." The New York Times wrote, D'Angelo, muscularly cut and glistening, is shot from the hips up, naked, with just enough shown to prompt a slow-burning desire in most any woman who sees it. The video alone could make the song one of the biggest of the coming year. Untitled, How Does It Feel? Climbs to number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100, the only Voodoo single to chart. The video earns 3 MTV Video Music Award nominations, including Video of the Year. Voodoo debuts at No. 1 on the Billboard 200, selling 320,000 copies in its first week. Critics are rapturous. Time magazine names it the #1 album of 2000. Rolling Stone and Spin put it on their year-end lists. At the 2001 Grammy Awards, D'Angelo wins Best R&B Album. Untitled, How Does It Feel? Wins Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. D'Angelo had done it. He had made his masterpiece. He had proven that art could sell. He had revolutionized R&B and hip-hop, and it was about to destroy him. March 2000. The Voodoo World Tour begins. D'Angelo is backed by the Soultronics, an all-star band directed by Questlove, featuring Pino Palladino, James Poyser, Roy Hargrove, and others. J Dilla's group Slum Village opens several dates. But something is wrong. At shows in Los Angeles, journalists report seeing women grab his legs, his stomach, his crotch. Fans scream at him to take off his shirt. Some throw money at him on stage. D'Angelo tells Rolling Stone, "Sometimes, I feel uncomfortable. To be on stage and trying to do your music and people going, take it off, take it off. 'Cause I'm not no stripper. I'm up there doing something I strongly believe in. The music, the reason for all of this, has become secondary. No one is talking about the revolutionary production, the Dilla-influenced rhythms, the 5 years of artistic study at Seoul University. They're talking about D'Angelo's abs. I kind of felt, for lack of a better word, like a male stripper," D'Angelo would later tell Tavis Smiley. "I felt objectified." About 3 weeks' worth of shows were cancelled toward the tour's end in late 2000. When the tour finally ended, D'Angelo returned to his home in Richmond, Virginia. And then he disappeared. Years later, in a 2019 documentary called Devil's Pie, D'Angelo would describe the psychological toll. "The whole idea that you'd sold your soul because you're playing the devil's music instead of playing in the church. That's very much part of my issues deep down." Manager Dominique Trenier, who died in 2016, admitted in a 2008 interview with Spin that the video had gone too far. In the general populace's memory, he's the naked dude. The price of that image was steep. D'Angelo stopped performing. He gained weight, deliberately destroying the physique that had made him famous. He struggled with depression, alcohol, drugs. He retreated from the music industry entirely. Plans for a live album were scrapped. Work on a third studio album started and stopped. Started and stopped again. Years passed, then a decade. Questlove would occasionally tell reporters the new D'Angelo album was 99% done. Then 2 more years would pass. Former Fugees member Pras Michel offers perspective. "It's not that D'Angelo is crazy. If it's not the orthodox way, then people tend to say you're crazy. People said Einstein was crazy. D'Angelo had whatever he was dealing with personally, and sometimes people don't know how to give you a break because he had such an impact." The collective that had created such magic at Electric Lady Studios was also falling apart. In September 2000, Vibe magazine published a feature about the scene at Electric Lady. The article called them the Soulquarians and featured a group photo. But Questlove had specifically asked Vibe to make it about the family, not just him. When the issue came out, the headline read The Soulquarians, with Questlove prominently featured as if he were leading a band. "I was in Chicago when I saw it, and I said, oh shit, this is bad," Questlove recalls. "The next thing you know, every phone call that came in, people were saying, yo man, it looks like I'm working for you. I'm not an Aquarian, I'm my own person." Literally, that's when it all fell apart. The creative paradise at Electric Lady began to crumble. Common's experimental Electric Circus sold disappointingly when it was released in 2002, which discouraged MCA Records from supporting more artistically free projects. Bilal held improvisatory jam sessions for his second album, Love for Sale, but the label shelved it after it leaked. J Dilla, the spiritual heartbeat of the collective, was struggling with health issues. He had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, TTP, and lupus. On February 10, 2006, 3 days after releasing his masterpiece, Donuts, J Dilla died at age 32. Producer Mark Ronson, who had visited Electric Lady during the Soulquarians period, said in 2015 that the studio's Glory Days era had sort of ended. Voodoo never received a proper follow-up. After 14 years, D'Angelo would finally return with Black Messiah in December 2014, an album that proved he still had the magic. But it took 14 years of struggle, recovery, and rebuilding to get there. In those 14 years, Voodoo's influence spread like wildfire. Listen to early Kanye West, The College Dropout, and Late Registration, and you hear D'Angelo's influence, the introspective lyrics, the soul samples, the willingness to be vulnerable. Kanye has cited Voodoo as transformative. Listen to Alicia Keys, listen to Jasmine Sullivan, listen to India Arie, listen to early Beyoncé, listen to Frank Ocean, listen to The Weeknd, listen to Kendrick Lamar's introspective approach to hip-hop. All of them walked through doors D'Angelo and the Soulquarians opened. The album's influence on jazz was equally profound. Pianist Robert Glasper, drummer Chris Dave, and countless others began incorporating Dilla-influenced rhythms into jazz, creating a whole new subgenre that blended improvisation with hip-hop production aesthetics. Nas wrote about the album's significance. It represents a serious moment in black music, when young artists were taking charge and breaking through doors. It cleared the way for rap music to be what it is today. In 2003, Rolling Stone ranked Voodoo na 488 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. By 2012, it had climbed to the 481. In the 2020 revision, it jumped to Mo 28, calling it an album heavy on bass and drenched in a post-coital haze. In 2009, Pitchfork ranked it number 44 on its list of the top 200 albums of the 2000s decade, calling it a triumph of hands-on, real-time, old-school soul minimalism. Rolling Stone placed it at 23 on its list of the 100 best albums of the decade, stating, "The decade's most magnificent R&B record was also its most inventive, so far ahead of its time that it still sounds radical." And in the ultimate validation, Time magazine named it the #1 album of 2000. 5 years. 200 reels of analog tape. Countless hours jamming at Electric Lady Studios. A collective of the most talented musicians of a generation, all chasing something they called the vibe. The result was a masterpiece. An album that redefined R&B. An album that showed hip-hop could be introspective, vulnerable, human. An album that proved you could make art that was both experimental and commercially successful. But what did it cost? It cost J Dilla his credit. His name absent from an album he spiritually guided. It cost the Soulquarians their collective. Dissolved by success, magazine articles, and egos. It cost D'Angelo 14 years of his life. Vanished into depression, addiction, and recovery because the industry turned him into something he never wanted to be. Russell Elevado reflects on those years. The whole thing was like lightning in a bottle. We captured something special, something that could never be replicated. But it also took something from all of us. Questlove puts it more bluntly in his memoir, Mo Meta Blues. We were trying to make a classic album, and we did, but in the process, we broke the artist. That's the price of perfection. The untitled video, the marketing decision that made D'Angelo a sex symbol, haunted him for over a decade. In interviews after his 2014 return, he spoke about it with a mixture of regret and acceptance. "I was young and I was naive," he told The Guardian in 2015. "I didn't understand the ramifications of what I was doing. I thought I was making art. I didn't realize I was creating a monster. But was it worth it?" Manager Dominique Trenier, before his death, offered this perspective in a 2008 Spin interview. The untitled video got people's attention. It made them listen to the album, and when they listened, they heard genius. Sometimes you have to use sex to sell art. Is that a compromise? Maybe. But without it, would anyone have heard Voodoo? The question remains unanswerable. Would Voodoo have succeeded on its artistic merits alone, or did it need the sex symbol, the marketing, the controversy? What we know is this. Voodoo changed music. It showed that R&B could be experimental without being uncommercial. It proved that imperfection, Dilla time, drunk drumming, buried vocals, could be more powerful than digital perfection. It demonstrated that taking 5 years to make an album, if you're chasing something transcendent, is time well spent. Pino Palladino reflects, "Those sessions at Electric Lady were the most creative period of my life. We weren't making music for radio or for money. We were making music because we had to. Because something spiritual was happening in that room." Roy Hargrove, before his death in 2018, said, "D'Angelo created a space where jazz musicians, rappers, singers, and producers could all speak the same language. That's rare. That's precious." The albums that came out of those Electric Lady sessions, D'Angelo's Voodoo, Common's Like Water for Chocolate, Erykah Badu's Mama's Gun, The Roots' Things Fall Apart, represent a golden age. A brief moment when commercial success and artistic integrity weren't opposing forces. Music journalist Touré summarizes it perfectly. For a few years in the late 90s, Electric Lady Studios became Soul University. The students were already masters, but they were studying something higher. They were chasing ghosts. The ghosts of Hendrix, of Stevie, of Marvin, of Prince. And for one album for Voodoo, they caught them. December 15, 2014. After 14 years of silence, D'Angelo releases Black Messiah with almost no warning. The album is raw, political, angry, and beautiful. It proves he still has the magic. But it's not Voodoo. Nothing is Voodoo. Russell Elevado, who also engineered Black Messiah, explains the difference. Voodoo was about perfecting imperfection. We had time. We could chase the sound for 5 years. Black Messiah was made in 3 months because D was inspired by Ferguson, by Eric Garner, by what was happening in the streets. It's a different beast. When D'Angelo finally returned to touring in 2015, he was a different person. Older, heavier, wiser, more comfortable in his own skin. At a show in London, he addressed the audience about the untitled video. I made a mistake. I let people turn me into something I wasn't. But that taught me who I am. I'm a musician. I'm an artist. I'm not a sex symbol. I'm a father. I'm a man who makes music. The crowd roared. Questlove, who still plays drums for D'Angelo on tour, reflects on what they built at Electric Lady. We were kids playing with fire. We were trying to make something that would outlive us. And we did. But we didn't understand that when you make something immortal, you have to sacrifice something mortal. For D, that sacrifice was almost his entire career. Today, Electric Lady Studio still stands at 52 West 8th Street in Greenwich Village. The walls still have Hendrix's paintings. The vintage equipment is still there. Studio A, where Voodoo was born, still hosts sessions. But the magic of those late 90s nights, when Questlove, D'Angelo, Pino Palladino, Roy Hargrove, Common, Erykah Badu, J Dilla, and a dozen others would gather to chase the vibe, that magic is gone. Or maybe it's just sleeping, waiting for the next generation of musical geniuses to wake it up. The 200 reels of tape used to make Voodoo still exist in a vault somewhere. Russell Elevado has mentioned that there are at least 100 additional reels, complete songs, alternate takes, extended jams, that have never been released. There's another album in there, Elevado says. Maybe 2 albums, but that's D's decision. That's his art. Will we ever hear it? Will D'Angelo ever revisit those sessions and release the music that didn't make Voodoo? No one knows. And maybe that's fitting. Voodoo was about mystery, about buried vocals and slippery rhythms, about music that doesn't reveal itself easily, about sounds that feel like they're coming from another dimension. An album that took 5 years to make. An album that used 200 reels of tape. An album that won Grammys and changed music forever. An album that broke its creator. An album that was worth every second. The story of Voodoo is the story of American music's most dangerous bargain, the pursuit of perfection. We celebrate artists who chase greatness. We reward those who sacrifice for their art. We romanticize suffering as the price of genius. But what happens when the price is too high? D'Angelo spent 5 years in a studio, studying the masters, jamming until sunrise, laying down 200 reels of tape, refusing to compromise his vision. He made one of the greatest albums in music history, and then he disappeared for 14 years. Was it worth it? Asked D'Angelo in 2000, standing on the Grammy stage holding Best R&B Album, and the answer is yes. Asked D'Angelo in 2005, struggling with addiction and depression, unable to even listen to his own music, and the answer might be different. Asked D'Angelo in 2015, returned and reborn, playing Untitled to sold-out crowds who finally appreciate the music more than the image, and maybe the answer is yes again. The truth is, great art costs something. It cost J Dilla his health. He died at 32, 3 days after releasing his masterpiece, Donuts. It cost the Soulquarians their collective. It cost D'Angelo his anonymity, his peace, 14 years of music making. But it gave us Voodoo. An album that sounds like nothing before or since. An album that proved R&B could be experimental and successful. An album that showed vulnerability could be strength. An album that demonstrated the power of collaboration even when the credits don't reflect the full truth. Questlove offers the final word. People ask me if we'd do it again, if we'd spend 5 years making another Voodoo. I always say no. Because you can't chase lightning. It finds you once if you're lucky. We were lucky. And Voodoo is proof. This has been The Sound Vault. Every album has a story. And some stories, like D'Angelo's, are about the price of genius and whether greatness is worth everything it costs.